There are some people you meet who carry silence like a language. Their eyes seem older than their age, their smiles quieter, their presence heavier, yet not in a burdensome way, but in a way that tells you they've walked through fire and learned to make peace with the smoke. These are not just wounded people. These are souls who have suffered too much and been changed by it in ways the world often fails to notice. When a person undergoes repeated suffering, something profound begins to form within their psyche. The mind, in its effort to cope with persistent emotional, psychological, or physical pain, begins to hide away the most painful fragments of experience, memories, feelings, and responses that are too overwhelming to face consciously. Over time, these fragments become part of what is called the shadow self. This shadow is not evil or malicious. It is simply the part of the self that has been rejected, forgotten, or deemed unacceptable because it was associated with weakness, fear, or shame during moments of intense suffering. Imagine a child who has learned that crying only brings punishment, or that vulnerability is mocked rather than embraced. That child learns to bury sadness, to hide fear, and to deny tenderness. As that child grows, those buried feelings do not disappear. They sink into the unconscious mind, creating a kind of emotional basement. In adulthood, the person may present as emotionally strong or unaffected, but underneath, the unacknowledged pain continues to stir. Suffering, when unprocessed, leaves residues, unspoken griefs, unresolved angers, unmet needs, and the accumulation of these can distort how a person responds to the world. The shadow self then becomes a repository of all that was once too painful to feel. It is created out of necessity as a defense mechanism, yet it exerts a powerful influence on behavior. People who carry this wounded shadow may find themselves acting in ways they don't fully understand, snapping in anger when they meant to stay calm, withdrawing suddenly from a moment of connection, or reacting intensely to situations that others would find harmless. These reactions are not random. They are echoes from the unconscious, where old wounds are still bleeding beneath the surface. One of the most challenging aspects of this condition is that it often leads to contradiction. A person may genuinely desire closeness, yet push people away. They may crave safety, yet sabotage the very relationships that could offer it. These contradictions are not evidence of irrationality or instability. Rather, they reveal the inner battle between the conscious self, which longs for healing, and the shadow self, which remains stuck in defense. The more the person ignores this inner conflict, the louder the shadow becomes, sometimes manifesting through depression, anxiety, or compulsive behaviors. This inner fragmentation, born of suffering, affects identity itself. The person may feel they are never fully seen or known because they have hidden so much of themselves. And even when they wish to open up, they may struggle to trust that doing so won't bring more pain. So they protect themselves, not just from others, but from their own deeper emotions. They may say things like, "I don't know why I feel this way," or "I don't feel anything at all," because they've spent so long exiling those parts of themselves that carried the heaviest burdens. Understanding this behavior requires a shift in perception. What appears on the surface, emotional distance, irritability, detachment, is not the whole story. It is the visible sign of an invisible wound. These individuals are not broken beyond repair. Rather, they are divided within. Their healing begins not with judgment, but with awareness. Awareness that the shadow self exists not to destroy them, but to protect them from what once felt unbearable. When that shadow is acknowledged, not condemned, it becomes a gateway to integration and transformation. People who have suffered too much in life often develop an extraordinary sensitivity to emotional and psychological environments. This heightened awareness is not a gift they sought. It is a survival mechanism, born out of necessity. When someone endures repeated emotional pain, betrayal, abandonment, or trauma, they begin to recognize patterns in human behavior, tone of voice, body language, and unspoken cues. Their nervous system learns to scan their surroundings constantly, not for curiosity, but for safety. They may become skilled at detecting shifts in mood, subtle signs of tension, or undercurrents of resentment in others, sometimes even before those emotions are consciously acknowledged by the people around them. This form of hyper-awarenessness, though often invisible to outsiders, becomes a deeply ingrained part of how they navigate the world. For someone who has been hurt repeatedly, safety is rarely found in what is said. It is often found in what is not said. They begin to read between the lines of every conversation. They listen not just to words, but to pauses, hesitations, and changes in rhythm. A slight delay in response, a flicker in the eyes, or a sudden change in posture can communicate more to them than an entire speech. It is not that they choose to interpret these signals with suspicion. Rather, their nervous system has been trained to remain alert, to detect threats before they materialize. This kind of emotional sensitivity can sometimes be mistaken for paranoia or overreaction by those who haven't lived through similar wounds. However, for the individual, it is experienced as a kind of knowing, a felt sense that something is off or unspoken. Their reactions might seem exaggerated to others, but internally these reactions are tied to deeply encoded memories. A phrase that sounds innocent to one person might echo an earlier moment of trauma for another. That echo triggers a cascade of emotions that may seem disproportionate, but in reality, it is the psyche's way of protecting itself from a perceived danger. Over time, this hyper-attunement can lead to emotional exhaustion. Being constantly aware of others' emotional states, anticipating shifts, and bracing for disappointment or conflict takes a toll. Yet paradoxically, it can also bring a kind of empathy that runs unusually deep. Those who have suffered may understand pain in others intuitively. They may offer comfort without being asked. They can sometimes speak directly to a person's unspoken sorrow because they themselves are fluent in the language of hidden wounds. However, this same gift can create inner conflict. While they are deeply tuned in to others, they may feel that others are not able or willing to tune into them. They sense everything but may not feel seen themselves. The world for them is often a place where emotional authenticity is rare, and this realization can foster quiet loneliness. They might stop sharing what they truly feel, believing that no one can fully understand the depth of their perceptions. Their relationships are often shaped by this sensitivity. They may form deep bonds quickly, drawn to people who seem emotionally safe or genuine, but they can also withdraw suddenly if they sense betrayal or inauthenticity, even before any visible harm is done. Trust is not given easily. It is earned through consistency, presence, and emotional honesty. They may test others, not out of malice, but as a way to ensure they will not be hurt again. This behavior may confuse friends or partners who don't realize that underneath lies a vigilant heart, still healing from wounds that never fully closed. In a world that often rewards detachment and emotional minimalism, the deeply sensitive nature of these individuals may be both a burden and a profound strength. They may not always understand why they react so strongly to subtle things, but in truth, it is not about logic. It is about memory, about the body and mind remembering what once broke them and now striving to avoid that pain again, even if it means living with the constant hum of emotional radar. When a person has suffered too much in life, a common behavioral pattern begins to form, a tendency to either isolate themselves or develop strong emotional armor. This is not an intentional rejection of others, nor a sign of arrogance or coldness. Rather, it is a deeply ingrained response that has grown out of the repeated experience of emotional wounds. The human psyche, in its attempt to survive, learns that vulnerability can be dangerous when it has been met too many times with betrayal, ridicule, neglect, or abandonment. Over time, the individual begins to view connection as a risk, not a comfort. Isolation, in this context, is not simply about being alone. It becomes a strategy of safety. These individuals often feel most at ease when they are away from others, not because they dislike people, but because solitude is the one place where they can lower their guard without fear of being harmed. In isolation, they are no longer required to perform emotional labor, to decode others' intentions, or to protect themselves from subtle manipulation. It becomes a space where they can breathe, even if loneliness is sometimes a companion in that silence. Many who have been deeply hurt retreat inward, both physically and emotionally, and though others may interpret this as detachment or aloofness, it is actually an act of self-preservation. On the other hand, those who do not withdraw entirely may instead create emotional armor, thick layers of detachment, sarcasm, indifference, or emotional distance. This armor is carefully constructed over time. It often begins with the realization that showing feelings has led to pain. A child who cries and is shamed for it learns to smile instead. A person who opens their heart and is met with rejection learns to pretend they don't care. Each disappointment adds another layer to the armor, until eventually, even they themselves may no longer know how to take it off. This armor can manifest in many ways: being overly self-reliant, refusing to ask for help, masking hurt with humor, or maintaining superficial relationships that avoid emotional depth. These behaviors may seem like strength, and in some ways they are. They show how a person has learned to survive in a world that once taught them vulnerability equals weakness. But underneath that strength often lies fear. The fear that if they open up again, they will be destroyed by the weight of disappointment they can no longer bear. The paradox is that while these defenses offer protection, they also create a prison. The same armor that shields them from pain also blocks out intimacy, connection, and love. Many people who have suffered deeply crave closeness but feel incapable of truly accepting it. They may find themselves pushing others away just when relationships begin to deepen, unconsciously afraid that allowing someone too close will only reopen old wounds. They may long to be understood, but they fear being seen too clearly, worried that their hidden scars will be too much for others to accept. This creates a constant tension within them. The desire for connection collides with the need for protection. They may spend years hovering between these two poles, unsure how to reconcile them. This internal battle can lead to feelings of confusion, frustration, or hopelessness, as they try to navigate a world that expects openness while they still live in the aftermath of wounds that never received proper care. People around them might wonder why they seem guarded or emotionally unavailable, but the truth is that this behavior is not about rejection, it is about survival. For those who carry this kind of emotional armor or choose isolation, the path to healing is complex. It requires not only the gradual dismantling of their defenses, but also the creation of a space where it is truly safe to do so. Until that space is found, or until someone is willing to sit with them without demanding immediate openness, they will continue to wear the mask, not because they want to hide, but because it's the only way they've learned to feel safe in a world that once felt dangerous. When a person has suffered deeply, especially over long periods or through multiple life events, a shift often occurs in their relationship with the external world. What once may have been a life filled with social connection, activity, and external validation begins to feel hollow or insufficient. In its place emerges an intense and often solitary inner world. This shift is not always visible from the outside. The person may continue to function in daily life, attend work, interact socially, and maintain responsibilities. But within them, a silent transformation is unfolding. Their attention turns inward, not out of selfishness or narcissism, but as a necessary retreat into the psyche, where they begin to explore their own pain, thoughts, fears, and longings. This inner world becomes a landscape shaped by emotion, memory, and imagination. It is a space where they replay conversations, analyze past choices, and try to make sense of what has happened to them. Unlike people who are merely introspective or philosophical by nature, these individuals are often compelled to dive inward because the outer world has failed them in some profound way. Perhaps they have been betrayed by someone they loved, or endured years of silent suffering that went unnoticed by those around them. In the absence of reliable external support, they seek understanding and stability within themselves. The richness of this internal life can be both a blessing and a burden. On one hand, it allows them to connect deeply with abstract ideas, emotional truths, and spiritual questions. They might be drawn to writing, music, art, or solitary walks in nature, activities that help them process what they feel but cannot always express. They may find solace in books, in silence, or in contemplation, because these things do not ask them to explain their pain. They simply give it space to exist. But on the other hand, this inward turn can also isolate them further. The more time they spend within, the harder it becomes to share that world with others. Words often feel inadequate to describe the complexity of what they carry, and so they may say nothing at all. This inner world is rarely a place of peace at first. It is often chaotic, crowded with unresolved grief, shame, anger, and longing. It takes time for them to navigate these internal landscapes. Sometimes they get lost in their own thoughts, spiraling into self-doubt or melancholy. Other times, they may experience moments of clarity that feel almost mystical, a sudden insight about life, about suffering, or about the nature of love and loss. These moments are hard-won, often coming only after periods of deep internal struggle. People with such intense inner lives can appear distant or preoccupied to others. They might seem uninterested in trivial conversation or reluctant to participate in superficial social activities. But it is not because they look down on others. It is because their energy is often spent navigating the complexity of their own emotional world. Relationships can be difficult, not because they lack love or desire for connection, but because they fear being misunderstood or dismissed. They long for a kind of emotional resonance that is rare, and when it is absent, they prefer the solitude of their thoughts to the noise of empty interactions. This depth of inner experience does not always lead to despair. In time, it can become a source of wisdom, creativity, and resilience. Many people who have suffered greatly and turned inward become deeply thoughtful, capable of profound empathy and insight. They understand the fragility of life, the importance of kindness, and the need for meaning. Their inner world, though forged in pain, becomes a wellspring of strength and understanding. But this world is private, and they often reveal it only to those who approach with gentleness, patience, and sincerity. Without such understanding, they will keep their inner sanctum hidden, not out of pride, but out of the quiet knowledge that some things are too sacred to be shown carelessly. People who have endured prolonged suffering often develop a complex relationship with trust. Their ability to trust others, and sometimes even themselves, becomes strained, uncertain, and layered with protective instinct. Trust, for most, is built over time through consistent care, honesty, and shared vulnerability. But for someone who has suffered too much, trust is not something they offer freely. It is something that must be earned with great effort and even greater patience. This is not because they are inherently suspicious or difficult, but because their life experiences have taught them that people can be unpredictable, promises can be broken, and closeness can become a source of pain. When trust has been violated, especially repeatedly, it begins to alter the way a person views relationships. They might enter a new connection with hope, but that hope is often overshadowed by a quiet fear, a voice in the back of the mind warning them not to get too close, not to rely too much, not to reveal too much of themselves. Even when the other person has given no reason for doubt, the echoes of past wounds remain loud. This isn't a sign of weakness or paranoia. It's a deeply wired defense mechanism born out of survival. Once a person has been emotionally wounded, their inner world develops alarms, signals meant to protect them from being hurt again. These individuals often struggle with vulnerability. To them, being vulnerable may feel like standing on a battlefield without armor. The idea of opening up, of depending on someone else, of letting someone see their wounds is often terrifying, not because they don't crave connection. On the contrary, many of them deeply long for it, but because they have learned that vulnerability can be exploited. Perhaps someone they trusted in the past used their openness against them, or perhaps they were abandoned at a moment when they most needed support. Those memories don't simply fade, they settle into the nervous system, influencing future choices and relationships. This distrust doesn't only apply to others, it can extend inward too. People who have suffered may begin to question their own judgment. They might ask themselves why they allowed someone to hurt them, why they didn't see the signs, why they couldn't protect themselves. This internalized doubt can lead to a fractured sense of self. They may struggle to make decisions or to believe in their own emotional instincts. They can become stuck in cycles of overthinking, analyzing every word, every action, every possibility, in an attempt to avoid repeating the pain they've already known too well. Despite all this, the need for trust does not disappear. It simply becomes more guarded. If someone approaches them with patience, consistency, and emotional integrity, they may slowly begin to lower their defenses. It doesn't happen quickly. Trust, for someone who has been deeply hurt, is not restored in grand gestures. It is built in the small moments. It's found in someone who listens without judgment, who shows up when they say they will, who doesn't flinch at the messy parts of their story. Over time, these repeated experiences begin to rewire their understanding of trust. They begin to believe, cautiously, that not everyone will hurt them, that some people are capable of staying, of understanding, of loving without an agenda. But even as they begin to open up, a part of them remains vigilant. That part isn't trying to sabotage connection, it is simply remembering pain. This is the inner struggle of someone who has suffered too much. They want to believe in the goodness of others, yet they are constantly preparing for that belief to be shattered. This dynamic can be exhausting, both for them and for the people who love them. It requires compassion, not pressure, gentle reassurance, not demands for instant closeness, and above all, it requires the recognition that learning to trust again is not a linear path, but a winding one, filled with hesitation, courage, and the slow rebuilding of faith in human connection. When someone has suffered deeply and repeatedly in life, they often begin to look at the world through a lens that is different from those who have not known that level of pain. Their perspective shifts from the surface of things to something deeper, more existential, more meaningful. They no longer see life as merely a pursuit of pleasure, success, or status. Instead, they begin to search for meaning, for truth, for something enduring that can make sense of the chaos they've endured. This search is not a luxury, it is a necessity, a response to the suffering that has stripped away illusions and forced them to confront the raw essence of human experience. For these individuals, suffering becomes a teacher. It pushes them into questions others often avoid. Why do people suffer? What is the purpose of pain? Is there something beyond the material world that gives life a greater significance? These questions are not philosophical musings for them. They are vital inquiries that often emerge from sleepless nights, from moments of despair, from standing at the edge of their own endurance. They may begin to read deeply, to study religion or philosophy, to meditate, or simply to sit in silence and observe their thoughts. Not because they are trying to become wise, but because they are trying to survive. They are trying to understand the architecture of the invisible world, the inner life, the soul, the meaning behind suffering. This pursuit of meaning often gives them a kind of quiet depth. They may not speak often about what they've learned, but it changes the way they carry themselves. They listen more carefully. They pause before speaking. They are less interested in superficial conversation and more drawn to those rare, honest exchanges where something real is said. They may not be easily impressed by appearances, and they often have a kind of inner strength that doesn't seek recognition. This depth isn't born from ambition, it's born from the fire of experience. They've been through the storm, and they've emerged with a different understanding of what matters. They often develop a stronger sense of empathy and compassion. Because they have known pain so intimately, they become attuned to the suffering of others. They may notice when someone else is struggling, even when that struggle is hidden behind a smile. They don't need loud cries for help. They recognize the quiet ones. Their own journey through darkness teaches them not to judge others quickly. They know what it means to be misunderstood, to be dismissed, to be labeled. So instead, they offer presence, gentleness, a kind of support that comes not from obligation, but from recognition. This search for deeper meaning also affects the way they approach love, friendship, and time. They value sincerity. They cherish the rare souls who can sit with them in silence and not be afraid of what it means. They no longer rush through life trying to fill every moment with noise. They understand the value of stillness, of solitude, of slow conversations that unfold like poetry. They are not interested in proving themselves to the world. They are interested in being true to themselves, to others, and to the life that continues to shape them. And while their journey may still be filled with moments of doubt, grief, and uncertainty, they walk it with a kind of sacred attention. Every pain they have endured becomes part of their vision, part of the wisdom they carry quietly. They don't need to preach it, they simply live it. And in doing so, they often become a mirror for others, a quiet reminder that even in suffering, there is the potential for depth, for healing, and for meaning that transcends what the eye can see. The behavior of those who have suffered too much in life cannot be understood through quick judgments or casual observation. Their silence hides storms, their distance masks longing, their strength is not bravado, but a quiet survival. They love deeply, think profoundly, and trust rarely, but when they do, it is sacred. Their inner world is not a place many are invited to, but it holds wisdom forged in pain and a truth only suffering can teach. To meet such a person is to stand in front of someone who has learned to live not in spite of suffering, but through it, and in that they become a testament to the human soul's ability to endure, to feel, and to still choose to seek meaning in the dark.